dog treats are getting expensive, and if you like to pamper your furry friend like we do, the best thing to do to avoid both the chemicals and things that they put in dog food and to cut costs is to make them at home. Now, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago if I would make my own dog treats, I'd have said you were crazy. I would never do it. But once you get into it, it's kind of fun. It's like baking cookies or something. And the dog loves them. And so I'm giving him something that he enjoys for very little money. So in just a moment, I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the first thing we do is take 5½ cups of rolled oats, not instant oats, rolled oats. And I like to just put them in the blender and grind them up. It's not a super fine flour, but for the purposes of dog treats, these work fine. The original recipe said to do everything in the food processor by grinding the oats and then adding the other ingredients, but for my food processor, it bogged it down. So I'm going to do this a little differently. But we start with the 5½ cups of rolled oats. Then you want to take 1 cup of either applesauce or pumpkin puree or smashed banana. I even thought the other day I could do this with cooking and smashing up a sweet potato for the dog. You just want something that's going to hold the oats together, basically. I actually made pear butter last year, so I'm just going to add, and I know that these jars come up to about a cup, so I'm just going to dump in 1 cup, 1 jar of the pear butter. We don't have a picky dog, so he'll eat pretty much anything I throw together like this. But just think along the lines of something. Like I said, the pumpkin or the applesauce works good. So just throw that in. Then I'm going to add in 2 eggs. That is the basic recipe. Is just the 5½ cups of oats, the 2 eggs, and a cup of whatever you decide to mash up. Now, because I like to do a little bit more for the dog, I'm going to add a couple of tablespoons maybe of the peanut butter protein, like I used in the granola, just because that gives it a nice peanut butter flavor for the dog. It's good for him. He enjoys it. So just throw in a couple of, about 2 tablespoons of that. Then another thing I started adding is parsley. Because it helps with a dog's breath. So no set amount. I just throw in probably a couple of tablespoons or so of parsley. It's good for the dog. So that's pretty much it. Now this gets pretty thick, as you can imagine, and hard to do. So I am going to move it to the KitchenAid, mix it up, and then we'll put it on the counter and roll it out. And we'll discuss what you do from there, okay? Okay, so just mixed it for a few minutes with the KitchenAid with the paddle attachment. You could probably mix this by hand, but as you can see, it's pretty stiff type of mixture, and it can take quite a while to mix it by hand. Once I start kind of mashing it together on the counter, I'll know if it needs a little bit more moisture, few more drops of water, or if it's too sticky and I've got to add a little bit of flour to it. So I did not flour the counter, but we should be okay. So I just kind of want to mash it together before I put the rolling pin to it. And like I said, you can tell it's pretty thick and hard to maneuver. You could, I have in a pinch, taken, it just got too late at night and I didn't want to do anything else, take and roll it together, pop it on a sheet and bake it and feed it to him that way. It's just, I found it was fun to use the little dog bone cutter. I use a big one because I've got a big dog. But these were like super cheap on Amazon. I got several different sizes, and that's just the size we use for our dog. So I'm just going to start trying to roll this. Like I said, it's to start with, it's a little hard to do, but as you work it, it works pretty good. This seems to be a real good consistency. It's not too sticky, it's not sticking to the roller, and it's not so dry that I can't kind of keep it together as we go. So we're just going to roll it out to a nice, as consistent as I can, consistency. The nice thing about this mix is you don't have to worry about overworking the dough, because it's not that type of dough. So I will roll out some of the bones and then, or cut out some of the bones, and then I'll kind of mix it back in, do this all over again, and roll it out again a few times until I fill up the tray. The other nice thing is I just use parchment paper on a flat tray. I can fill that thing to the edges, literally. These do not grow when you bake them, because there's no baking soda or powder in them. So they pretty much stay the same size that you make them, which is nice, just because you don't have to worry about them crowding each other on the pan. I can get them pretty close together, touching even, and they're not going to stick together or anything. So the biggest thing is, I could make them this thick if I wanted, but then it doesn't make very many treats. And I like to try to kind of get it a good bit thinner so that they last longer for the dog. And I'm not doing this every other week or anything. So I'll just roll it out to about where a good thinness that I like. You could even, you know, if you wanted to get real tricky with this, if you had like wanted to add some type of medicine into it, you know, you'd have to measure that out and figure that out. At one time I tried adding like crushed glucosamine tablets just to help his bones, but he actually doesn't have any problems in that regard anymore, so I don't worry about that. But you could. Like I said, it's kind of customizable to what your dog likes. Lucky for us, our dog will eat literally just about anything. So, let's keep working that. See where it just kind of wants to come apart. But it's a good, just tacky enough. Okay, so I did remember I like to use my little bench scraper, and that kind of helps just push everything in, make nice kind of clean edges, and keep things together a little bit better. So I use that kind of, just try to check the consistency too and make sure. Hubby checked for me, and this is about 1/4 of an inch. You get little cracks in the edges and stuff, you can just kind of mash it together. This really did turn out to be just the right consistency to do this, I believe. So I just come in here. Like I said, if you use a smaller cutter, then you know you're going to get more out of it. But then, like for our dog, I would just end up having to feed him more of them if I do that. But I'll make as many of these, get as many of these cut out of this dough as I can. Put them on the sheet, and then kind of roll it back up in a ball, and roll it back out again, and get as many more as I can. Okay, so we've got all of the bones cut out of this roll, and I'm just going to kind of get this out of the way a little bit. Again, the bench scraper is great for just scooping up these bones. If you need to smooth them out a little bit, you can. It's not a requirement. This just works good to kind of get that all together. That one came out a little thicker than I like, and because I like them kind of the same consistency, and sometimes as I'm going I can feel it's a little thicker, I'll just take and roll that ever so slightly. Makes it just a slightly larger, but it's kind of the same the same thickness. Probably gonna find the same with this one too. Yep. Try to keep them about the same thickness anyway, just so that they bake all together at the same time. These are going to bake in the oven for about 25 minutes if you want a nice crisp consistency. Now we'll go ahead and say now, when they're done, the first time I made dog bones, I made the mistake of just putting them in a container in the pantry thinking, oh, they're great. You know, they're like cookies. They'll hold. About a week later, I found mold on most of them and nearly cried because I thought, oh, all the time that I spent, you know, was wasted. But I realized there's no preservatives in this. So what I started doing is I put them, most of them, go into the freezer. See that one on the edge is a nice consistency. Most of them go into the freezer, and then I keep about a week's worth in a jar in the refrigerator. You could give them to the dog straight out of the freezer if you wanted to, but they're kind of hard, you know, and it would be hard for them to chew. So I like to take and, like I said, keep a week's worth in the refrigerator at a time, and the rest in the freezer, and then that way they're good, and they're gonna last, and as long as you have treats to last. Like I said, I can put these on the sheet all close together. We're getting to some thicker. It's always hard to tell because this dough is so thick and almost dry. It's sometimes hard to tell how thin or thick you have them. But so it just makes it a little fatter. Still goes on the tray. They still squeeze in nicely. Okay, so I went to put all the leftover dough together, I guess if you'd call it dough, and my perfect consistency on the first round turned into a dry, crumbly mess for the second time, and I was having a hard time getting it to even hold together, so out came the little bottle of water, and I just spritzed the dough with water until I got it to where it would hold together again. And it still may be a little, yeah, it's still a little wanting to be a little dry and crumbly. I may spritz them again once I get them on here, but they should still hold together. I didn't want to put too much water because if you get too much water, then you've got a sticky mess that sticks to the rolling pin and you can't get anything done. And then you got to pull out the wheat. You're using whole wheat or something like that will then get you back to the right consistency. Not sure why, like I said, it did such a crumbly texture for the second go round because it was so nice the first part of the batch, but you see it's just a little drier. As long as they hold together to cook, they will firm up and be nice. I did preheat the oven to 350 for these, and like I said, about 25 minutes will make them a nice crisp consistency so they hold together well. And probably for the rest of this dough, since there's not a lot left and I'm running out of room on the pan, I'll probably just make little balls out of the rest of this, just ball them up, and you can literally put them even in between. You know, like this one's really not wanting to stick. That's where this comes in handy. Now, had I had them all the perfect consistency and not had to make some fat, I could have filled up this whole pan. And I could probably mix this back together one more time and do one more bone. But for the sake of time savings, we're just going to take and kind of the oil in your hands will help mash this together too. And I'm just going to mix it up, roll it up. Oh well, we are not doing that. Okay, we're going to have to spritz it some more. But basically what I'm going to do is just take and make some little balls and put them on here. I can put them here. If I run out of room up here, I can literally put them like this in between the bones, you know, in any of the little gaps between the bones, and they'll bake just fine, and the bones will bake just fine. So that's what I'm going to do with the rest of this, and then I'm going to stick it in the oven for 25 minutes, and we'll see what it looks like when they come out. Okay, so you can see the dog bones came out pretty much just like they went in the oven. I did end up doing one last one. Some of them are pretty, you know, kind of cracked. As I started putting it back together that second time after the first rollout, it was a lot drier, but they'll still hold up well enough. Basically, I'm going to just, you know, they have a nice texture to them. They're good and done. Somebody's been waiting patiently and impatiently because he knows that these are for him. So I'm going to give him one. I'll probably give him this one that looks the most cracked. But I think that's pretty much it. See, they break apart pretty easily. Now, like I said, keep about a week's worth in the fridge probably, and the rest in the freezer, and they'll last until they're all done. But even though he's a big dog, I make him take them in little bites. He loves them. What's not to love, right?